Jebbie the brown bear and Laerke the polar bear came from two completely different places. But the duo had one thing in common: equally heartbreaking backstories. They seemed destined for solitude until the Detroit Zoo finally intervened, placing them in the same exhibit. However, it was a big gamble since no one knew if the bears would become friends or enemies. We can only imagine how tense the zookeepers must have been when Jebbie and Laerke were reunited. Just because they are bears, after all, doesn't mean they would automatically get along. But given the troubling past both animals shared, the hope for a positive outcome would have been palpable. Let's start with Jebbie's story. In June 2021, residents of Tok, Alaska, spotted a young brown bear wandering outside a suburban area. His mother couldn't have been left behind, could she? Well, that wasn't the case here. The little pup had absolutely no company as he wandered the streets. Some locals contacted the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which is also known as ADF and G. They couldn't let an orphaned bear feel at home on their street. So the department went to pick him up. Before the animal left, however, it was given its name. There was real concern for Jebbie's welfare at this stage. After he is born, bears usually remain under the watchful eye of their mothers for about 3 years before going off on their own. The Alaskan cub was much younger than that, so the ADF and G feared it would die in the wild. With this in mind, the ADF and G made a great decision. To give Jebbie her best chance at survival, the orphaned bear was first transported to Anchorage's Alaska Zoo. While he was there, he was given a full medical checkup by the staff, who also monitored him until the next significant movement. Jebbie finally said goodbye to Alaska while heading to the Detroit Zoo. What a whirlwind spell for the little one. As for his health, the grizzly tipped the scales at approximately 76 pounds when he arrived at the facility before spending some time in quarantine. During that period, Jebbie also received another medical checkup by veterinarians from the Detroit Zoological Society. We wonder what she did with all the care and attention. Anyway, once this was done, the cub was released into the Arctic Ring of Life exhibit. But as we know, he was not there alone. That brings us to Laerke. The young polar bear was already a resident of the Arctic Ring of Life when Jebbie arrived, and like the grizzly, she was also trying to get over a rather sad spell. We hope you have a box of tissues on hand, friends, because you're probably going to need them. Laerke was welcomed into the world in November 2020 at the Detroit Zoo. No, she wasn't born in the wild like Jebbie. Her mother, Suka, also gave birth to a second puppy named Astra that day. It turned out to be a very significant moment for the attraction in Michigan. Because, well, as a press release from the facility noted, the cubs are the first polar bears to be born and successfully raised at the Detroit Zoo since 2004. Wow, that's a gap. However, it was not for lack of trying. Suka had given birth to babies in both 2018 and 2019, but they all died soon after. The aforementioned press release, which was released in January 2021, raised another interesting point. The births are part of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA, Polar Bear Species Survival Plan, a cooperative population management and conservation program. There are currently 56 polar bears in 25 AZA-accredited zoos and aquariums. So it's fair to say that the arrival of Laerke and Astra was a big deal. Of course, just a couple of days after his birth, concern spread throughout the zoo. It seemed that the happy moment was about to turn into a tragedy, as one of Suka's daughters suffered a dramatic decline in health. Laerke had stood very still in her family's temporary shelter, showing signs of spent strength. Zoo workers were able to notice this, thanks to cameras placed discreetly around the space. At that stage, they knew something had to be done, and quickly. Hesitation was not an option. Suka was taken out of the shelter, giving workers enough time to grab Laerke. That must have been tense. Once they had the sickly cub, she was transported to the Detroit Zoo's Ruth Roby Glancy Animal Health Complex. She had a complete checkup before receiving permanent care. Laerke was especially small during that period, tipping the scales at just over a pound. He spent the next few weeks in incubation, away from his mother and his sister. He was a different kind of isolation than Jebbie felt in Alaska. Still, it needed to be done, and his subsequent progress proved it. By January 2021, Laerke reached just over 11 pounds in weight. Her time in the incubator had finally come to an end, as she then moved into a sort of playpen. The polar bear still had work to do before she could return to the Arctic ring of life. However, as Laerke continued her recovery, her sister was being lavished with attention by her mother inside the zoo. Suka rarely let Astra out of her sight, keeping her close to her throughout the day. You can't help but feel for poor Laerke, as she was missing out on an important link. The zoo also acknowledged the situation. In the press release, he said, "The rare occurrence of twin polar bears raised separately, one by the mother and one by humans, means that much will be learned through this experience. Both cubs are closely monitored, and their milestones development are tracked." Anyway, Laerke was released back into the exhibit when staff gave her a clean bill of health. We can only imagine her relief. But there was only one problem. Due to the time away from her, there was some serious doubt that the polar bear would be able to reconnect with her family. It was something heartbreaking. So both Laerke and Jebbie were familiar with feelings of loneliness when they crossed paths at the zoo. However, would that be enough for them to join together? After all, the bears practically grew up in different worlds. Could that contrast even lead to clashes? Well, it's time we found out. Let's focus back on the day Jebbie first entered the exhibition. It was July 2021, and zookeepers kept him away from Laerke to begin with. They planned to stagger their eventual meeting, hoping that it might strengthen their chances of becoming friends. Makes sense, right? Because the bears were so used to being alone at that stage, it was unknown how they might react to each other. Maybe they would avoid the idea of socializing altogether? We don't envy the zoo staff one bit. This was a very delicate situation to handle from the sidelines. However, the workers moved forward with their plan as they slowly reunited Jebbie and Laerke over the summer. The duo began to get acquainted, which was a positive sign. At least they didn't go into attack mode. But the key question was whether or not things would progress beyond that stage. By September 2021, we finally got our answer. After spending 2 months at the exhibition, Jebbie had become Laerke's best friend. Phew, thank God for that. We would have been devastated if these guys hadn't bonded, given everything they'd both experienced up until then. Laerke and Jebbie were often seen playing in the Arctic ring of life, fighting to their heart's content. The pair were pretty much joined at the hip, as they did a lot of other things too. For example, the bears loved to swim and share their toys all day long. It was beautiful to see, and something tells us the folks at the Detroit Zoological Society were breathing huge sighs of relief as the bond deepened. Because, well, the idea of dropping another bear into Laerke's life was all his. To go into more detail on that front, the Director of Life Sciences spoke to the Detroit Zoo for a press release in September 2021. Scott Carter said, "There are no other polar bear cubs we can bring here to live with Laerke, so we contacted state agencies who frequently must find homes for orphaned grizzly bear cubs. We are delighted to be able to give him sanctuary to Jebbie and provide a much-needed companion for Laerke." Carter didn't stop there. He also focused on an additional positive that came from the bears' newfound friendship at the zoo. The Life Sciences Director continued, "This social development is of critical importance to both Laerke and Jebbie. We think we can say this was a victory overall then." The Detroit Zoo seemed to agree with that as well, as the facility's Facebook page posted a video of Jebbie and Laerke in the exhibit. The clip highlighted their heartwarming bond as they frolicked under the Michigan sun. It was really nice, and on top of that, his story was detailed in an accompanying message. The social media post has since generated a huge reaction online. The video has garnered over 400,000 views at the time of writing, as well as nearly 20,000 likes. Additionally, it has garnered over 1,000 comments from Facebook users, and many are delighted with the way things turned out for the bears. One social media user wrote, "I love this. What a sweet story. Sad circumstances brought Jebbie and Laerke together, but you've done a wonderful job doing what's best for them. I hope they have very happy lives in Detroit, although not those that nature would have prescribed." and the kind words kept coming. Another person gushed, "This is beyond precious. Many thanks to the people involved in making this happen from day one. I'm not sure, but I hope we get to see them grow into adulthood together. It would be a shame if they eventually split up, and wildlife is the greatest joy." Speaking of which, that raises an interesting point. What are the plans for Jebbie and Laerke in the future? Well, as of September 23, 2021, the Detroit Zoo confirmed that people could finally visit the duo in the exhibit. The facility had no intention of keeping them away from each other as they continue to age. That also made us think about something else. As Laerke ages, will she have another chance to see her mother and sister again? Could she finally reconnect as a family? Unfortunately, you probably shouldn't get your hopes up on that, with Carter explaining why in the zoo's press release. Carter said, "Suka is a great mother and very protective of Laerke's sister Astra, but it is clear that she no longer recognizes Laerke as her cub. Returning Laerke to her mother and sister is not an option for us." The Detroit Zoo also went into a little more detail about the situation in a comment below the Facebook video. The zoo's comment read, "We had hoped to reunite Laerke with his mother Suka and sister Astra, but even from a distance, it was very clear that Suka did not recognize Laerke. After seeing the way Suka continually responded to Laerke, it wasn't safe to bring them together. That's so sad. A future reunion would have been the perfect way to cap all of this off. Oh well, at least Laerke has been able to find a new brother to cover Suka and Astra's absence. The next few years around her section of the Arctic Ring of Life should be fascinating."